Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Hello. I am ready, so ready for this episode to drop. And I don't know whether it feels like it to you, but I feel like the Selling to Corporate podcast has revived with the spring and summer. I have been putting out some, let's say, interesting episodes recently, which has encouraged more of you into my inbox than ever before. And for that, I am ever grateful. But it also means that hopefully I'm talking about the stuff that you're actually interested in. So let's try and keep it along that theme with today's episode and get your brains awareing with some of the things that you might want to be considering for your B2B sales process this year. Now, I don't know about you, but the world is changing rapidly. And I feel like every time I sit down at my laptop, I see things that I didn't expect to see from just the internet in general. That is not any kind of pointed remark about the online space. It's just every time I open any internet browser, there's something that I just didn't expect. And that's mainly because, like I say, the world is changing at a rapid pace. We're seeing lots and lots of different things happening across the coach, consultant, speaker, trainer, and done-for-you service provider markets. And we're seeing it get a little more competitive, which means that some of the interesting / gross, tacky, I don't know that's a word, but that's what I'm going with, sales tactics that we've been seeing, they are all coming to the fore. And you know that I love to hear about them. So if you do experience anything weird and wonderful that you think this would really make Jess laugh, please do email it in, because I do live for them. I live for those stories about the weird, the gross, the wacky sales strategies and techniques that we see in the market. And not because I think that it's bad for people to be experimenting with sales strategies, but just because sometimes I like to have that moment of, wow, you really thought that would work. Okay, cool. And then obviously I can analyze exactly why it doesn't work and make sure that we do not do those things. All right, so for those of you who are just joining along and getting onto the Selling to Corporate bandwagon, if you do enjoy today's episode, please do share it with a friend. I am on a mission this year to educate as many service providers as possible who are looking to sell into companies in a best practice, not sleazy or gross way. And also people who want to be signing corporate clients regularly, as opposed to people who are spending an awful lot of time on social media talking about it and not actually generating any cash from it. So where am I at in the year? Well, before we dive into today's episode, I think it's important to note that things are changing in the market, and that does mean that things in my business are changing, which is always exciting. And over the last few months, I've been talking quite openly on the podcast about how the business to consumer market has really shifted. And in some cases, the bottom is completely falling out of it. So if you are somebody who's been trying really hard to have the big launches of 2015 in your coaching business or your therapy business or whatever else kind of business that you own, please do not be surprised or disheartened if it hasn't gone in the way that you expected. Now, because this was something that I predicted, it meant that actually at the back end of 2024 and heading into this year, I spent a lot more time progressing my B2B business. So I've been very busy, and I've talked about it openly on the podcast, in my newsletter this year, very, very busy with a lot of amazing companies that I am working with to solve various sales problems in their businesses, to support them in navigating the tricky tense, turbulent market that some of them are experiencing. And of course, some of those organizations are actually selling to consumers. That's their market. So I'm working with lots and lots of organizations who are navigating a really tricky sales environment. And luckily, they have me on hand. Yay. I bet that's what they're all thinking. But they have me on hand to make sure that they're setting the very best practice sales strategies possible to actually build up their own B2B revenue streams, to bolster the activity that their sales people are doing, and to make sure that they are doing best practice B2B sales in the most effective and efficient way. They are looking for the 10% gains. They're not looking for the 100% switch around, but they are doing things differently because the market is different. And I think that, for me, one of the things that I have focused on less this year is the B2C side of my business. I've been working with some amazing B2C clients, so individuals like you, in my boardroom experience, so my high-level experience for service providers, coaches, consultants, speakers and trainers who are looking to sell more effectively and efficiently to corporate companies, but are already generating over 100K in their business each year. I've also been working with my amazing C-suite participants, which is just honestly the biggest joy for me. I really, really love it. And at the time of recording this episode, we are about to have our second in-person day this year, which I'm loving. And obviously, I've just launched Cold to Closed, which is now officially open. And if you haven't heard about it or seen it yet, go and have a look at the link at the top of the show notes. You can check it out. It is the only live sales experience I'll be running this year apart from the C-suite. So if you've been thinking, I need to work with Jess, I need to get her brain on my business, I need to get her sales techniques to show me how to land corporate clients in 90 days or less, then you need to go and check that out. But I think it's quite important to note, this year I haven't been as focused on B2C, and there are reasons for that. One is because the back end of last year, so I looked along with my CFO at our figures last year, and in the last 6 months of last year, it was quite obvious that the B2C market was really starting to dip. And we noticed this across the board, not just in my business, but also I'm very fortunate. I have friends who run very, very successful multi-6 and 7-figure businesses who are primarily selling to consumers. And they were talking a lot about failed launches, about numbers being down, about ad spend being higher than ever before. And so with that data in mind, I obviously talked about it on the podcast quite a bit. I started refocusing, my efforts and my sales efforts and energy, because I think maybe we don't talk about this enough on the podcast. I love to sell. I really love to sell. And I really, really love to deliver to clients. I love seeing that moment where someone just gets it. They understand the sales technique, and they understand that it can be much simpler than the current way they're doing it. And they start using it and seeing results. And, I'm really passionate about that, whether that's B2C or B2B. But I also didn't set up a business so that I could play the internet game. And there were a lot of times in 2024 that I really felt like I was having to play the internet game in almost some ways to convince people that selling to corporate was a good idea, or, that they should absolutely be leveraging the power of selling to companies. And I felt like I was doing a lot of risk management for the internet. And, saying to people, hey, did you know that the bottom's dropping out of the consumer market? And I would get all of these angry people being like, but Jess, you just don't understand. I love being on Instagram or whatever. And it was really, A, disheartening, and B, not my job. And for me, I looked at the last 6 months of 2024 and I just thought, do you know what? I don't want to play the game anymore. I want to be back at my core, which is any sensible, intelligent person who understands the phenomenal transformation and value rooted in practical, best practice, accredited sales training. I want to be with them. I'm not going to pander to the internet anymore and try and be selling B2B sales to people, because that's not my business. They're not my clients. And I'm not responsible for the internet at large and the decisions that people make. And actually, that was pretty freeing for a bit. It was freeing for the first 5 minutes that I considered it. And then I thought, oh my gosh, but there are going to be so many people who are upset or offended by that. Because if you say things like, I only want to spend time with smart, intelligent people who already know that sales training is the most effective thing for their business, then everybody who is not currently investing in sales training or applying it gets really offended. Like, you've personally reached out to them and said not very nice things to them. And that's really not what I was saying or particularly cared to say. It was just, I got tired. I got really, really tired of trying to sell people on what you should be spending your time on in your business to sell stuff, to generate revenue in your business. Because I felt like I was caring more about other people's businesses than they were themselves, And I realize that's a very blanket statement. I also realize that's very untrue, because I've spent the last, 8 months or so noodling on this. And I realized that in actual fact, it wasn't that people didn't care about their businesses. It was that they were terrified of changing their businesses. And so, what had actually happened was, in this crazy internet world, we'd created this vacuum where building a business differently, i.e., not producing and spamming the newsfeed with thousands of pieces of relatively low value content all of the time, where we were running, businesses where they were metrics focused on activities that were actually measurable, instead of being able to blame our lack of results on lack of popularity. Those ideas were terrifying to people. My husband actually said they were revolutionary. He thought that was a better word. I think I'm going to stick with terrifying, because after all, if things aren't working in your business, or they're not working as you want, or they're not working as quickly as you'd like, it is terrifying to consider any other alternative. And that feels risky. And I understand that now, in a way that when I made my blanket statement back in September last year with my CFO, and I was just like, well, if people cared about their businesses, of course they'd be doing sales training. I understand it now in a way I didn't then, which is why back then I didn't talk about it. I hadn't had time to think about that message properly and process it and think about what I actually wanted to say around it. But it is where more of these episodes from me around the impact of doing or not doing in your business are coming from. And it is why I'm sharing some of the impacts that the changes in the market are having on people who were previously selling successfully to companies and who now are finding it more difficult. It's why I'm talking about the impact that the B2C market and the flatlining of that, and the fact that people, are struggling to look at their disposable income and spend it on yet another course that isn't going to move the needle forward in terms of actual revenue generation, but might get them a few more followers. It's why those things aren't working as well. And how that is actually impacting people like you, who are thinking, well, surely it shouldn't be this hard. Surely it shouldn't take this long. Surely I shouldn't still be feeling overwhelmed and frustrated and all of those things. Because that's how I started to feel, and that's why I moved my business very consciously back to, very consciously. I sound like, oh gosh, those interviews that people do with celebrities after they've overhauled their lifestyle, don't they? They're like, I very consciously thought about what I was putting into my body, or I very consciously thought about who I was spending time with. But I did. I very, very consciously thought about my business and thought, I want to go back to these roots where I am working with companies and I understand and recognize just how important that revenue stream is going to be over the next few months, especially seeing the changes in the B2C market, especially seeing the fact that companies were reducing permanent headcount and how big the opportunity therefore was going to be, especially knowing that on companies reducing that permanent headcount, actually, they were going to be more competitors in the market than ever before. So that best practice sales process was just going to be so, so important. And so based on all of those things, I very consciously moved my business to be focused on maximum revenue generation from corporate clients. And that's been really fun and really interesting. It also doesn't diminish the experience that I'm having or the genuine just happiness and joy and pride that working with the individuals in the C-suite, in my boardroom, in cold to closed, as people start to enroll in that experience, doesn't diminish any of the happiness and joy that I have working on that side of my business. But it means that from a sensible perspective, i.e. the perspective of the person who is always going to be responsible for a significant amount of bills, because hello, energy costs and utility prices and mortgages and all those kinds of things, I need to do and work on the most effective and efficient sales processes for me that pay the maximum and give me the ability to enjoy running my business and enjoy working with the clients that I have and actually get to continue being at the cutting edge, the forefront of sales strategy and techniques that I'm then able to pass on to individuals who otherwise would have no idea and would still be, trying to market and sell to companies like it was 1985 with lumpy mail or whatever people are going back to. I should do a whole episode on lumpy mail because it doesn't work, and people still think it does. But, that's not the episode I'm going to do today. So that, I guess, is my overview of just where I am. And and maybe some of this renewed energy comes from the fact that it's summer, comes from the fact that I have spent the last quite a long while focusing on the best practice B2B sales processes and techniques that are landing me corporate clients every single month. And that mean that I am at the cutting edge and that forefront of sales strategy, technique, implementation at scale. And it also means that I'm getting to see those results pay off for my individual clients. And, I love that. For me, that's a full circle business. And I'm still doing it working 4 days a week, I've still kept Fridays outside of work time in my business. And even saying that still makes me feel a little bit sick. But on the rare occasions I've worked a Friday, I haven't worked a Monday, or I've substituted with another day, and I'm proud of that in 2025. I'm almost 11 years this month into my business, and I'm now working a 4-day week and not feeling any guilt around that, and feeling totally in control of my sales process and totally in control of my predictable revenue. And I want that for everybody, and that's why I'm sharing this episode today, so that we can all take a bit of a pause to think about our sales process, how it's currently feeling, and give you some honest advice on what you need to do with how you're feeling about it. And, as ever, you get to listen, you get to consume totally for free. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to take my advice. But as we do navigate this changing market together, I think that you get to be fully responsible for the choices that you make in your business. And so as long as you're making decisions with all of the information in front of you and you're going into whatever you're doing eyes wide open, I'm happy. I'm relinquishing my savior complex of 2024 and oh my goodness, if people don't do all these things, then their businesses will fall apart and da 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 da. Like I'm relinquishing that in favor of you having the right information for you to make the right choices for you in your business. And we'll see where we get to on this crazy journey together. All right. So with all of that in mind, I just want to start this episode with you just taking a pause to think about how your current sales process is feeling for you. Because we are, by the time this episode airs, 5 months into the year. And actually, the June-July period is pivotal for business owners who are looking to sell to companies. It's pivotal for a few reasons. One is that sales processes that are not closed down before the end of the second week in July are going to drag on much longer because people are going to centre parks and enjoying holidays and time with their kids and all those kinds of things. So it makes decision making longer. It also is pivotal because we are coming up rapidly to the end of the first half of the year. And I know that a lot of people don't love doing this, particularly if they don't feel like things have been going as expected. But it is the time to review your metrics and see how you stack up against your original goals. Now, I know that the internet at large teaches this idea that you just pick a number out of anywhere and decide that's going to be your revenue number for the year. And so a lot of people actually feel pretty crap about looking and reviewing their numbers because they're not close to where their targets were. For some people, this year is actually pretty different because for some people, whilst the rest of the world has been, focusing on other things, focusing on how difficult the market is, how turbulent, they've just been getting their heads down and running sales processes that are best practice and making a ton of cash. So for some people, you might be reviewing your numbers in June thinking, actually, this has been my best year to date. Actually, this has been the year where I've made the most revenue, where I've set the best boundaries in my business, where I have, worked on things that were actually meaningful to me and impactful to organizations that I work with. So some of you are going to be sat back like thinking, yeah, you know what, I'm really pleased with where I'm at. For those of you who are not, this is that pivotal point and opportunity for you to change. And I say that knowing that the summer holidays are coming up. And I say that knowing that some people, just like me, have had a slower start to 2025. But here's the thing. Not changing anything now means that the summer is difficult for sales. And it means that the biggest sales period of the year, September, is also going to then be very, very difficult for sales. And that's across the board, right? That's not just if you are selling to companies. So if you're sat there thinking, oh, well, that's okay. Like, I'll just sell B2C really heavily over the summer, and then I'll get back to selling to companies in September. Wrong answer. Because just like you, people are going to be spending their time over the summer off with family, trying to recharge from the craziness that is running their own business. So it's not going to be any easier to just pop down, and say, well, I'll just pop down the B2B stuff and pick up B2C for a little bit. That's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same this year. So if you are feeling good right now and you're making tons of cash in your business, you've got the revenue goals that you're hitting and exceeding, you are happy with your boundaries, the way that you're delivering, the amount of sales activity that you've got going on and the pipeline that you're building, amazing. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Just stay super focused, make sure that you're doing all of the right things, are bringing in those sales calls steadily every single month for you so that you can create that proactive sales pipeline that's going to carry you through, carry you through the summer and carry you through into Q4 and into 2026 as well. But if you're somebody who's feeling a little overwhelmed because maybe you've been delivering an awful lot at the start of this year, but your sales pipeline is diminishing because you haven't been able to make time for business development. So you don't have as many sales calls coming in, or the ones that you do have are not converting at 75% plus into proposals and sales. It's time for you to do some work because this is that pivotal moment. And what you don't want to do is come back in September feeling super rushed and overwhelmed and panicked and then fall into that, oh gosh, I just need revenue now. So you start, making some interesting choices around pricing and undercharging and that kind of thing. And if you're somebody who's feeling totally lost about where you are because revenue hasn't been as expected or the sales haven't come in as you were expecting, or maybe you lost clients because for whatever reason, they stopped projects that you thought were a shoe-in, or, your main stakeholder left and the new person coming in doesn't think that your area is going to be a priority for their first 100 days or whatever in the business. if you are feeling lost because your revenue is not where you want it to be and you don't have a sales pipeline that is producing steady, qualified sales calls every single month, and it hasn't done, and we are now in the 5th month of the year, then you must take action now. Okay. So rather than sitting and kind of dwelling and wallowing in, oh gosh, well, I still got 8, I don't know. I was like 8 months of the year left. That's incorrect. You've still got 7 months of the year left, and I'll do it after summer, or I'll plug away now a bit and then take off, my 4 weeks and come back or whatever. You need to really have a good think about what you want from your business and what you're willing to give it in return. We talk a lot in the sales world, and actually we talk about it a lot when we're discussing objection handling, because anyone, companies, individuals, they can say that they aren't happy with an investment level, right? And even I get it. I work in sales and people will be like, oh yeah, but it's really expensive. You're not cheap. And I'm like, no, obviously I'm not. I'm really good. And so what I do will save you 6 months of working with somebody else who isn't as good. And that's why I'm a premium resource. And I say that to companies and I say that to individuals. And I think that we talk about this idea of investment and I mean investment in all ways, by the way, not just in terms of cash, but in terms of time and money. I see lots and lots of people who, they built a business, or they wanted to build a business because they wanted freedom. But actually, the stage and season that their business is in is not freedom, right? First year of your business is like, I don't know, it's like putting up a tent blindfolded when it's raining. It just, none of the poles know where they're going. And it seems like everything you touch just falls apart instead of working. And then you hit upon some like lucky pieces and temporarily you are sheltered, and then it just, craps back down. The first year of your business feels a lot like that. In fact, the first 5 years of your business can feel a lot like that, particularly if you haven't got your sales strategy worked out and if you're not doing things that are actually generating revenue steadily and sustainably. Your entire business can feel like that. However, when we talk about what we want versus the season that our business is currently in, people can feel uncomfortable about that. So if you're somebody who's saying, yes, I absolutely want companies to pay me £5,000, £10,000, £20,000, £50,000 per engagement, but you are not willing to put in the time that it takes to do proactive outreach, to book sales calls that are going to be worth tens of thousands of pounds, or you're not willing to spend the energy actually creating a sales call experience that makes a decision maker understand exactly what the commercial reasons are to working with you, or you're not willing to spend the money to invest in a proven sales strategy for yourself, or outreach techniques, or whatever it is that you need from whatever the gaps are in your business, then you need to take a real look at whether you are saying you want something, but you're not indicating that you are willing to do the work or invest the time, energy, and money required to get that result. And that's something that I spent time and energy on myself last year, and money, thinking about, what I wanted and whether or not I was willing to do what it took. And it turns out, I'm still not willing. I am still not willing to do what it takes to have a business that I used to have in 2014 to 2019, like with all the funnels and the technology and the bump offers and the million programs. Like, I just don't want it. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that the investment I made last year into coaching that ended up primarily being about discovering that I don't want to do that is a fail. Doesn't mean I regret it. It just means I still don't want to spend the time, money, and energy required to have that business. But I do want to spend the time and energy and effort on, the people that really matter, I do want to spend the time and energy and effort on talking to people who are smart and intelligent and want to work on B2B sales processes for their own business to generate corporate clients. And I do want to spend the time, money, and energy on doing the sales activities required in my own business to get corporate clients myself. I love those things. I just don't want to be paying Zuckerberg a ton of money for ads and, other odd things that I just don't enjoy or care about. So it's the same for you. I want you to think about that in this moment and think, am I happy with my business? And actually, am I doing the right things for the business that I have said that I want or that I say that I want? And if you're not, this is your wake-up call, right? Time to change. The second thing is, the market conditions today, and I've talked about this at the beginning of this episode. I also did a really in-depth episode called State of the Union, the Super Sales Insights to Smash Your Targets a couple of weeks ago, where I've explained the market is changing. But I'll be honest, I have been putting out episodes about the market changing since 2019. This is not new. The market is forever changing. Things are forever happening. In 2019, I was talking about the fact that the B2C market was going to crash because people would realise it was a giant pyramid scheme. And then in 2020, I was talking about the market changing because we had a pandemic. And then in 2021, I was talking about the market changing because suddenly companies had embraced virtual learning and remote working, and it had changed sales techniques. And there are so many things that mean the market is changing constantly. And that's okay. If you have and are using a best practice sales process, you're always going to be okay because you will always have predictable, sustainable revenue and the ability to create a sales pipeline. People who don't have that will always feel the impact of market changes or turbulence more. Kind of like sitting at the back of the plane. At least this is how one of my friends who's a pilot explained it to me. He was like, if you sit at the back, you'll feel the turbulence more. If you sit at the front, you are less likely to feel that turbulence. So, not less likely to feel the turbulence, you'll still feel it, but it will feel less. And as a result, I always book a seat right at the front. But it's that kind of thing. If you don't have a steady, sustainable sales process and you didn't have one when the market was relatively stable, good, things felt easy, and if at that moment you would have recognized it by you were probably getting a lot of referrals, it was easy to get sales calls, you weren't really hearing many objections around anything. People were just so happy to be back after the pandemic that they were like, yeah, let's get everybody in, let's do training, let's do things. If you didn't have a sustainable sales process then, you were already losing out on business, right? Because you probably weren't making the most of opportunities then. But if you don't have a steady, sustainable sales process now, and all you're hearing is that the market is changing, the market is bouncy, the market is turbulent, the market is difficult, and you are finding it difficult, nothing's changed really. Like, we still had objections back then if you were doing a volume of sales activity around price. People still back then had objections, specifically after COVID, when lots of charities were doing work for free. They felt like they had to sell against why pay for something instead of why have a charity come in and do something for free. It just felt easier, right? It felt really simple for people who had a sustainable sales process. There were arguably a few more opportunities for referrals and perhaps more of a positive appetite for things like virtual trainings and stuff post-pandemic. But actually, people who didn't have a sustainable sales process then missed out on opportunities, significant ones. And people who don't have a sustainable sales process now are still missing out on opportunities, significant ones. It's just that because the market is more changeable right now, and because we're seeing various things happen across both companies and their priorities and what they're spending on, and also the consumer market and their priorities and what they're spending on, people feel like they're getting hit from all angles. And that's really tough, And I talk a lot about the fact that years ago, I was working for a company. It was the recession. So companies were really, it was difficult. It's difficult to do the sales activity and get told no all the time and all your projects got canned overnight. It was really hard. But my sales director said to me then, this is where we find the good salespeople, because anyone can sell in an easy market, but only good salespeople will survive and thrive during a difficult one, and then they'll make a ton more money when it all evens out, which it will. Over the next 12 months, we will see the market even out, but we will also see a lot of small business owners who are no longer in business because they are not able to hold out and they are not willing to change the way that their sales process currently operates, right? So yes, the market is changing. However, for those of you selling B2B, it actually shows more promise than ever before. Management Today did a recent survey where over 58% of companies said that they were going to be spending more on contractors and external suppliers than they had in previous years because of the market changes. Now, unfortunately, when you give out stats like that, people are like, oh, but then that's fine. Like, if loads of companies are going to be hiring external suppliers, I don't need to work on my sales process. I'll just continue doing what I'm doing. And that is not the message here, right? Yes, there is huge promise and huge potential in the B2B market right now, only available for people who are doing the work to fill their sales pipeline, right? That's it. So if you won't do proactive sales activity, or you're not doing proactive sales activity, or if you're doing sales activity that isn't producing results, i.e. it is not booking you sales calls and converting into qualified proposals and sales, then you need to identify those gaps and work on them, because companies are going to be spending more than ever before on external suppliers, but ultimately they're only going to buy from ones that have got a decent sales process, right? Now, this brings us into an interesting conversation about how most people get business, certainly in the B2B space, and why it's no longer working. And if you've been around me for a while, you'll know that I'm going to talk about referrals. And historically, referrals have been a comfortable way for people to generate actually significant revenue in their businesses for years and years and years. I know of business owners who have existed solely on referrals, selling to companies who have been making in excess of $250,000 a year. And they have said to me for years and years and years, Jess, I would love to do something with my sales process, but I just don't need to, because I make so much money from referrals. I cannot see a world in which that will ever change. Hello, it is 2025 calling, and referrals, whilst historically comfortable, are no longer working as well as they did. And that is tough. And the reason that they're not working as well as they did is not because people don't want to refer anybody anymore, but it's because actually companies have reduced permanent headcount. So a lot of those people who were big champions and would get people in to do the coaching, to do the, consulting, speaking, training, etc., they've been laid off. So that has meant that a lot of people who had referral heavy businesses have seen a sharp decline in revenue. And that's really scary. Now, there are other reasons that referrals, whilst historically comfortable, are not working as well in this market. And, one of those is that actually generating referrals can be very difficult to cultivate. It can also be a very unreliable source of lead generation and of sales calls, because you can't always guarantee when a referral will come in, or what that referral will be, or how qualified it will be, or actually get hold of the person that you were referred to in order to book the subsequent sales call. And so, referrals should always be seen as a bonus to your B2B sales strategy, not the entirety of your B2B sales strategy. And so for those of you who have been running primarily referral-based businesses, you may already be seeing a dip or plateau in revenue. And that is something that you will want to be changing ASAP. Again, it's not to scare you. This is about having the eyes wide open conversation. This is where we are in the market. And it's not to say that you cannot make money selling B2B. There's tons of it out there. I've signed 5 new corporate clients in the last 3 weeks. There is absolutely money out there. There are contracts to be won. There is work that is massively, massively needed and that companies are investing significant amounts on. But the way that you did things last year, year before, they may need to change in order for you to continue revenue growth or even revenue stabilization. Okay. So if you are somebody who's seen the dip from referrals and you want to be, creating a more streamlined sales process, 100% spend your time, energy, money, effort, whatever you need to make that happen. Because like I say, the market is changeable. It's not a bad thing for people who are external suppliers selling into companies, but it is very difficult for people who have been primarily referral based where headcount is being cut. Okay, so we've kind of got that weird, dichotomy of people being laid off from jobs is great for external suppliers who wants to go in and, support initiatives that companies were already running to fruition to make those things happen. But for anyone who was primarily referral based, it's a real kick in the teeth because suddenly your champions are gone. And it's very, very hard then to cultivate those referrals when you don't know anybody and you don't have a proactive sales process in place. Okay. And so really this episode is to say, this is why you need to seriously review what you're doing in your sales process and what is working and what isn't. Now, I put out episodes a little while ago on troubleshooting your sales process. You can go back and you can spot the gaps and do your own on-the-spot sales gap analysis. But realistically, if what you're doing is working and has been working for the last 5 months and you've been booking in excess of 5 sales calls per month and closing 3 of those into contracts with companies, then you're fine. Keep doing whatever you're doing. If you're not, you need to be looking at where the gap is. Is the gap in your lead generation process? So is the gap that you are struggling to book sales calls? And if it is, you need to work on your lead generation. Is the gap that you are booking sales calls, but they are not going through to proposals or proposals that convert? I.e., you're getting to the end of a sales call and they say, just send us a proposal, but you don't actually feel like they're bought into it, or they're saying, can you send it to us so that we can benchmark it, or send us some more information and we'll try and get, the board or whoever bought into doing it. Then that you've got a problem with your sales calls and potentially with your proposal process. If it's that you've got lots and lots of proposals out that don't close, then again, you've got a problem with sales calls and with your proposal process. That's what you need to look at and understand, what is it that I need to change in order for my business to not only survive the next 12 months, but also to really be building the other positive things that come from being a specialist resource in a difficult market, which means increased brand visibility in a good market, means increased revenue when during the sort of more turbulent market, and also into a positive market, which means increased expansion for your business and however that looks in both turbulent and a positive market as well. So if you are not currently seeing that your proactive sales approach, or if you don't have a proactive sales approach, get one. But if you're not currently seeing that your proactive sales approach is producing 5 sales calls per month and that 3 of those are closing into contracts, then we definitely need to get that fixed. And that is exactly what Cold to Closed is designed to help you do. And it is designed to help you do that at this specific point in the market. So for this specific time of year and for these specific market conditions. So if you want to spend the next 6 weeks building out your B2B sales for the next 90 days so that you are actually getting better outreach results, higher response rates, more calls being booked with you, more proposals going out the door before the summer hits, then you need to go ahead, check out that link, get in. Like I say, it's the only live experience that I'll be running outside of the C-suite this entire year. It's been specifically designed for this particular time period of the year, of the market conditions, and it is going to be the best resource for having me in your back pocket for a few weeks to make sure that you're doing all of the right things, booking qualified sales calls and getting revenue in. So if you haven't checked it out yet, please go and do so. If you need it and you haven't signed up yet, consider this your nudge to get yourself over the line, get yourself in before we officially kick off. And as I say, if you've enjoyed this episode and it's made you think a little bit about the current market conditions and what you need to be spending time on, or the decisions that you need to be making about where your business is going for the rest of 2025, then yeah, I've done my job. All right, I will see you in the upcoming episodes. We've got a few amazing episodes coming up where we've got case study clients who are going to be coming onto the podcast and talking about their experiences using my best practice sales process and techniques, which I'm very, very excited about, and should be a lovely segue into the summer and give you some all-important inspiration for just how you can do things much, much better, much, much more effectively, and in a much more fun way in 2025. I'll see you soon.